Red Dead Redemption 2 is widely recognized for its richly detailed world and complex story. But over the years, fans became disappointed upon learning about the extensive amount of content Rockstar Games cut from the game during development. From cut explorable regions to safe houses and mythical creatures, these cuts offer a glimpse into what might have been and hint at the immense ambition behind the game's creation. Today, we will dive into the ultimate cut content iceberg, each tier revealing more of what Rockstar had originally planned, but ultimately cut. But before we begin, if you enjoy videos like this one, please be sure to subscribe, as 99% of viewers have not done so. Now, let's dive into this hidden history, beginning with some of the most well-known cuts and gradually descending into the game's deepest, most elusive secrets. We'll begin with the content that most experienced players likely know about. These are the intriguing cuts from the development that could have significantly changed the way we explore the game's familiar territories. Starting us off in Tier 1, we have Mexico as a playable region. Fans of Red Dead Redemption 1 may remember the sprawling Mexican landscape across the San Luis River. In RDR2's early development, there were plans for players to venture into Mexico, where they could experience ambient sounds, interact with NPCs, and even encounter the Mexican army. However, as we know, Mexico was cut from the final game. Despite finding some of Mexico's infrastructure in the game files, including a solitary building and remnants of its ambient music, it's clear this area was abandoned relatively early, likely to keep the project manageable. It appears that the version of Mexico that we were left with in-game is simply just a carried-over port from the original Mexico map in RDR1. However, players can still glitch into Mexico to explore it. And even better, a dedicated modding community has taken on the task of recreating Mexico in-game, bringing this cut content back to life. Next, we have Arthur Morgan in New Austin. In early versions of the game, Arthur could freely explore New Austin, just as John does in the epilogues. Evidence exists in the game files, where Arthur has unique voice lines for NPCs, hidden cutscenes, interactions, and even story hooks that would have allowed him to roam the Southwest without triggering an invisible sniper's wrath. Rockstar's decision to restrict Arthur from this territory may have stemmed from narrative considerations, as his bounty in Blackwater posed a legitimate reason for his exile from the area. Many fans, however, still speculate that this was one of Rockstar's biggest missed opportunities, believing Arthur's exploration of New Austin would have added depth to the game's story. While speaking of Arthur, Arthur's tragic backstory with Eliza and Isaac, the waitress and Arthur's love interest, as well as his son he lost in a robbery, is next up on our list, as the relationship could have taken a very different direction. Initially, Eliza was set to be a member of the Vandal End gang, and Isaac's death was likely going to occur early in the story, freezing to death on a journey to Colta. These darker plot threads were scaled back, and Eliza was ultimately downgraded to a mention in the game's files, hidden within the Easter eggs. Players have also managed to find multiple cut dialogue lines from her character. Her integration into the game may have dramatically shifted Arthur's storyline, possibly offering players a chance to see how Arthur balanced his outlaw lifestyle with a family, and how that side of him affected his actions within the gang. Now, let's move on to the Curse of Valentine. In the town of Valentine, several NPCs mention a curse, claiming the town is plagued by endless bad luck. According to the lore, settlers massacred a native family in Valentine and stole a treasure, which was depicted in an animal hide painting. While the treasure map was ultimately cut from the game, talented modders pieced together the 4 map fragments from the files, revealing what would have been an intriguing Valentine curse mission, where Arthur could explore ancient artifacts and perhaps even lift the curse himself. Now for our last piece of cut content in Tier 1, we're going to discuss the mystery of Princess Isabo Katharina Zinsmeister, which has intrigued players since the game's release. She was supposedly abducted from her family's hunting lodge 15 years before the events of the game. Though no ransom was ever demanded, and nobody was ever found, leaving players to speculate wildly on her fate, wondering if she was even kidnapped at all, or maybe eaten by an animal. You can find an NPC looking for the lost princess. He will send you to the Van Horn trading post to look for clues, where you will find a luggage and missing poster. Furthermore, leaked files reveal that she had an adult character model, meaning she could have been found later in the game as a grown woman. The game files also reveal that the player would have had the option to turn the princess into the Annisburg sheriff, hitting that at one point we would have been able to find her in the game, but that was cut for some reason. Her unmarked fate remains an unsolved mystery, leaving players questioning if this was merely cut content, or if Rockstar intentionally left this mystery open. Now let's get a little deeper as we dive into Tier 2 of our Cut Content Iceberg. This tier explores the lesser-known content cuts and the game's most haunting secrets. Starting in Tempest Rim, an inaccessible part of the map that is speculated to have originally been where the gang's first camp was located before the map and camp systems were overhauled. Tempest Rim can only be traveled to with mods. Early leaked maps show that locations like Annisburg and Van Horn were swapped. While Tempest Rim was the location for the gang's camp, Tempest Rim remains an empty ghost of what could have been, leaving players to imagine how much more might have been possible with the game's early movements. Next we have Guarma. The tropical chapter that feels rushed and contained was initially planned as an open-world region with its own side missions, free roaming, and even an archaeologist mission to retrieve artifacts. Arthur's voice actor hinted in an interview that Guarma was once envisioned as a hideaway where players could travel back to and evade their bounty. Both early game files and modded versions of Guarma reveal a cave system, a giant volcano, and NPCs and animals that were scrapped, adding to the theory that this chapter was drastically cut for time and scope. Furthermore, one of the many cuts related to Guarma involves a mission in which Arthur and Bill would assist Leon's niece in escaping the island. The mission was planned with complex voice lines and character assets, with Leon's niece sharing design similarities with Mary and Eliza, Arthur's other love interests. Rockstar had planned for players to help her flee to a safer part of the island, creating a thrilling storyline that would expand on Arthur's sense of morality. Now, let's talk about the horse breeding and companion systems that were cut from the game. Rockstar initially included a free roam companion system where players could bring gang members on explorations, adding comments and interactions to stranger missions. Another scrapped feature was horse breeding at the gang's camp, where players could raise baby horses to develop loyalty over time, culminating in Dutch's horse, the strongest in the game, being unlockable only through breeding. Both mechanics were abandoned to streamline the game's design, though they hint at an even deeper RPG experience that Rockstar had once envisioned. Next up we have safe houses. In early development, Rockstar allowed Arthur to buy safe houses across the map in towns like Strawberry, Rhodes, and Annesburg. These were similar to the homes players could purchase as John Marston in Red Dead Redemption 1. However, this idea conflicted with Arthur's loyalty to the gang, as living in a separate house would suggest he had one foot out of the group. For consistency in character development, Rockstar cut safe houses from the final game, though it would have been interesting to see Arthur enjoy moments of solitude. The feature would fit nicely with John's epilogue, potentially allowing players to see the aftermath of Arthur's journey from different homes. Now, let's sink deeper and discover the cut content buried below the ice as we move to Tier 3. This tier explores even lesser-known content cuts. Starting with minigames at camp and round the map, minigames like Liar's Dice, chess, horseshoes, and roulette were considered, but only poker, dominoes, and blackjack survived the final cut. Liar's Dice had the most work done, with coded dialogue indicating it was playable at some stage. Players who loved it in Red Dead Redemption 1 still miss it. These cut games would have added more ways for players to interact with the world. However, Rockstar likely removed them to save resources and streamline the game's existing features, that players continue to request their return. Another fun item that was cut from the final game was bicycles, which were originally intended to appear mainly in urban areas like Saint Denis. According to a developer, they were removed partly because they performed worse than the slowest horses, though in reality, a bicycle could outlast a horse over long distances due to a character's endurance. Unlike horses, bicycles wouldn't sustain injuries, but they also lacked storage space and saddlebags, limiting their practicality. But perhaps adding a quirky twist to the otherwise gritty and grounded world of the game. Next is the legendary giant white rabbit. This animal was a peculiar cut from the game, designed as a mythical creature hidden in the vast wilderness. This oversized rabbit, which may have been inspired by old folktales and literary references, had a unique model that set it apart from typical wildlife. Players could have hunted it as a rare encounter, with the reward being a special trinket crafted from its unusually large paw. Despite its absence in the final game, the rabbit has become a topic of intrigue, representing a bizarre what-if in the Red Dead world, and leaving fans curious about what other oddities might still be lurking in the game's files. Now let's move on to another cut game hideout, In early plans for the game, a slaughterhouse located just outside of Saint Denis was considered as a potential hideout for the game. This location was marked on the map and would have served as a base similar to Shady Belle or Clemens Point. However, the idea was ultimately scrapped, likely due to the impracticality of having an outlaw gang set up camp so close to a bustling city where they were actively wanted. Setting up a hideout mere minutes from Saint Denis would have conflicted with the game's usual need for discretion and strategic positioning. By removing it, Rockstar kept the game's hideout in more secluded Shady Belle. Now, let's move on to our final tier, Tier 4, the deepest level of the iceberg, showing off the cut content that least players know about. Starting with the original narrative structure itself, RDR2 was originally set to begin in 1877, covering the backstory of Arthur, Dutch, and Jose as they formed the Vanderland gang. The main plot would continue through the gang's dissolution in 1899, with John Marston's epilogues concluding in 1907. The ambition of covering decades of story was ultimately condensed, likely due to the sheer scope and complexity such a narrative structure would require. Next, let's discuss horse paper forging. In a scrapped mini-economy feature, players would have an option to forge legitimate documents for stolen horses, allowing them to sell horses at stables as if they were legally owned. A distinct NPC in each town would handle this paperwork, and players could sell horses without alerting stables. Eventually, Rockstar merged this idea with existing horse fences, who served similar functions, and scrapped the original feature. While it would have been interesting to interact with a forger character, the fences served the same purpose, creating a straightforward way to sell horses without added complications. Next, we have the cut character Shaq Serial Killer, which was a dark and twisted addition initially planned to add another layer of horror to Bay de Noir. According to the files, players would find the killer inside of the strange man's cabin in the Blue Water Marsh, chopping up a body with a hatchet and throwing remains to a gator below. Inside his shack, a gruesome stew featuring human hands would simmer in a pot. The twisted narrative surrounding this character hints that Rockstar intended to make the bayou even more unsettling, perhaps to fit with the eerie atmosphere. The cabin was later repurposed for the strange man's painting, which itself offers an enigmatic experience, especially when the strange man appears in a mirror behind the player. This shift from a grotesque encounter to a subtler psychological horror retains the marsh's creepy vibe while fitting more with the strange man's mythology. However, the player can still find an alligator underneath the cabin, further hinting that this content was cut. Now let's talk about the cut Charles Smith mission. In an early plan for the game, Charles was set to have a mission in Chapter 4 where he leaves camp to help eagle flies prevent Native American children from being forcibly taken to boarding school by the army. Arthur would have joined him, disguising himself as an army officer to assist in the rescue. The mission would escalate with an army officer attempting to shoot one of the children, claiming he was just following orders to ensure their removal. While this event is referenced briefly in the game, it ultimately happens off-screen, with Charles undertaking the mission alone. The decision to leave this mission out of the gameplay likely stemmed from narrative pacing and potential backlash. But had it been included, it would have highlighted Charles' commitment to defending his people and would have added another powerful moment of Arthur's growing moral alignment with Charles and the Native American cause. And to end this video off, we have to talk about the third meteorite, one of the game's most enduring mysteries hidden within the game's files. Players who thoroughly explore can find two meteorites, one in a small cabin, where a family appears to have been killed by the impact, and another in a nearby crater. The game hints at a possible third meteorite that remains unfound in the game's actual map. However, after 6 years it has never been found, leaving many to conclude that it never existed at all. There's speculation that this meteorite might have been linked to the It's Art achievement, where players can collect squirrel statues that mysteriously appear in different locations. In the files, there's a suggestion that the squirrel statue could award players a third meteorite upon completion. The absence of this final meteorite in the game leaves fans wondering if it was intentionally left as an open-ended mystery or if it was an intriguing piece of cut content. And now, if you didn't already, you understand my channel name. In exploring the cut content of Red Dead Redemption 2, we see the immense ambition and depth Rockstar aimed to achieve in creating this immersive world. Each cut, from legendary creatures and unique missions to hidden locations, adds to the mystery and richness of the game's lore. While these elements never made it into the final release, Their remnants in the files hint at a larger, even more intricate vision for the world of Arthur Morgan and the gang. These hidden details keep the community engaged, sparking endless speculation and appreciation for the game's storytelling and the untold stories that lie just beneath the surface.